Thank you. Good evening. This is exciting. And wow, Derek, that is quite the energy for 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. But this is exciting. Really, both Daniel and I are super honored to be presenting how we are looking at racial equity from the Department of Housing here at the City of Chicago. But before we jump into our presentation, I just wanted to give you some background on who we are. We can go to the next slide. So my name is Sandy Soto, and I'm Managing Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Housing. I oversee the Office of Community Engagement, Racial Equity, and Strategic Initiatives. This is a new office under the leadership of Commissioner Marisa Novara, and we've been leading on a number of different projects and supporting the teams across the department and across the city with initiatives related to racial justice, undoing systemic harms, and really improving on the policies, programs, initiatives that our other departments and colleagues out of the mayor's office are also focused on. So it's a huge privilege of mine to be able to do this for the city of Chicago. And I'm really excited for you to learn about the first racial equity impact assessment on the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan, not only for the city, but across the nation as well. I'll turn it over to you, Daniel.
Hey, everybody. I'm also really happy to be here and excited to share some of our work as it relates to racial equity and housing and data and some technology. I am Director of Policy Research and Legislative Affairs, as the slide says. Our division works very closely with Cindy and her team, and as well as other folks across the department and other departments in the city to move forward our policy agenda, which is trying to make housing more accessible and affordable to Chicagoans, and particularly the most vulnerable Chicagoans. So happy to get a little bit more into some pieces of that later on, but I think now I'm going to turn it back to Cindy for the first part of our presentation.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? So before we dive into the REIA, I want to note that the Department of Housing has a new mission and the first vision and values statements. This came out of our shop, but it really took the whole department staff to put this together. And it was probably one of the most gratifying experiences because it really allowed for us to think openly about how we would want to see affordable housing and really housing in general across the city be developed, be preserved for the residents of Chicago, but particularly those who have been marginalized, underserved. And if you want to check these out more carefully, they're on our website. They are new. They just came live in March. I believe they came online, or maybe April, but super excited that this came out of our shop and we were able to do this for the Department of Housing. I'm just going to read the mission statement because I think this one's extremely important for us. We've tried to now make sure that our work starts with our mission, speaks to our mission, can really live up to this mission. And so it states, the mission of Chicago's Department of Housing is to expand access and choice for residents and protect their right to quality homes that are affordable, safe, and healthy. Thank you, Daniel. The next slide, please. So before we go into more detail, I just want to kind of level set a little bit about what we mean by racial equity. This is kind of like the buzz, term now of like how we're looking at undoing systemic harms that have been part of, segregation, discrimination, much of the history of the city and across the nation. And so when we talk about racial equity, what we're really talking about, and we really want to make sure that this resonates with all of our stakeholders, and all of our stakeholders are everyone in the city of Chicago that interfaces with the city and that's committed to the improvement and seeing the city succeed. So I hope this resonates with you, or that you really kind of adopt this or can take this into your own work and space. But racial equity for us means acknowledging the history. How has systemic and structural racism shaped historical and current events? We don't shy away from storytelling, from truth telling, from ensuring that the harms that we've seen, data, the information that we have access to that comes before us really tells the story of the past. And before we talk about the present, we want to make sure we center that and we understand it. We also talk about shifting power. So it's not so much about us leading the way and us dictating, policy, program, services, and so on, but it's really a collective effort. It's really led by, the community, as you will see, and our programs and services are designed with a people first approach. And then it's about embracing accountability. It's really being able to look at that data, as I mentioned, the storytelling, being able to really understand, where we might have not honed into opportunities or not improved conditions, where we might have, improved them, but how we want to revise them moving forward. It's really ensuring that we understand our strengths and weaknesses. And so for us, racial equity is each of these and not shying away ultimately from the truth. The next slide, please. I also want to just level set that when we talk about racism, we're not talking about our own individual internalized biases or beliefs. We're really talking about structural. And so this allows not only for a more collective conversation, but it really is a systemic issue that we're trying to address. It's not necessarily on an individual basis, but it's really across the board what we want to see come out as a department, as a city, not only between the staff, but also with our stakeholders. And so we want to make sure that, when we address systemic racism or racial equity, that we're really looking at the bigger picture here. The next slide, please. And so this is extremely exciting for me to be able to tell you about the racial equity impact assessment. And I put these figures at the bottom. They were actually designed by one of the fellows that were part of this project with us. Her name is Katanya Raby, and she was a fellow at Chicago United for Equity. And so she designed these on her own, and they represent characters that you can read in our report that really tell the stories that we heard when we went out to the field to meet with residents. If we can go to the next slide, please. So a racial equity impact assessment, or also known as an REIA, is really about inclusivity. It's important for us to, again, make sure that we are shifting power, that we're taking accountability, that we're looking at the history. And so the REIA, which was first designed by Race Forward, and it's been adopted across many jurisdictions. For us, it came out of Chicago United for Equity, and both myself and the commissioner have really close ties to it. I used to be a fellow and she used to be on the board. So we had the honor to, come into this work with some background and some experience during doing racial equity impact assessments. But ultimately, they allow for us to ask different questions, for us to engage multiple voices, and for us to explore different solutions. And really everybody that interfaces with the Department of Housing, or in this case, with low-income housing tax credits, is engaged in the process of a racial equity impact assessment, from the developer to the impacted population. We engaged everybody across the board for a period of about a year. The next slide, please. So these are the steps of a racial equity impact assessment. And again, I just want to note that this didn't necessarily derive solely on our own from our own account, but it's really a iteration of what Race Forward has been able to do out of their own organization, GARE, Government Alliance for Racial Equity, or Racial Accountability, and a few other organizations across the country have done REIAs. And so we were really excited to be the first one to do it for the city officially from the city's standpoint. These have been done on behalf of community organizations for city-related policies, but this is the first one that we've done on our own, on ourselves. And so the steps, as you can see here, they took some time, and I've never done a racial equity impact assessment that at least didn't take a year. So there are many different parts of this that were really important. One was to look at the proposal. What was the issue? And for us, it was looking at low-income housing tax credits and the Qualified Allocation Plan, which is the awarding process for low-income housing tax credits, also known as LIHTC. And LIHTC is the largest source of funding for affordable housing across the United States. And it's for new construction and rehabilitation. So the city of Chicago is one of the few that receives low-income housing tax credit allocations from the federal government. Typically, it's on the state side. For us here at the city, the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago can allocate tax credits. So we looked at the proposal of the low-income housing tax credits and how have we done low-income housing tax credits or distribute these credits over the course of its period here for the city. We also had to look at the data. So what did the data show? What did the data not show? What is it that we were trying to aim for in terms of understanding how these units or these structures were really supporting impacted populations? And then we created a survey based on some of that data, based on the proposal, and we looked at who would be our stakeholders. And I put here a couple of examples of some of the stakeholders that we had a chance to speak with, including housing advocates, syndicators, developers, nonprofit landlords, organizations that support families that are low income or qualify for these units. And then we looked at the community engagement process. We wanted to make sure we captured, again, diverse voices. And one of the ways in which we had to tackle this during COVID is that we had to do this remotely and in person. And you can imagine in the fall, it was still a bit challenging to do that, but really for us, we had to do that in order for us to get to the residents. It wasn't as simple as hosting a Zoom call and people showed up for it. It really required us to be able to get to where they're at. And some of them, might have had like a digital divide or other issues. And so we did not want to put forward a report that didn't have the voices of the residents. And also importantly, for us was to include the voices of the staff. And so the staff who have been doing this work, who are committed to completing this in a way that is equitable, that benefits the end user or residents, really were part of designing what some of this community engagement process would look like, and also provide us feedback on what they would like to see do differently in the QAP process. And then after we gathered the data, we completed the surveys, we went out to the community, we put our recommendations together, and we came up with a total of 8 recommendations. I highly encourage you to read the report. Currently, it's draft format. We're going through the public comments that we received, and then we'll be finalizing the report sometime this month. But it's not going to look very different than what we have now. But it's a pretty thorough process, and you can see where we started and where we ended up with the recommendations, and really how this is going to appear for QAP and also for other programs out of the Department of Housing. And lastly, and this is important, is for us to make sure that we track progress, for us to ensure that the recommendations, the changes that we've noted really benefit the residents of these LIHTC units. So this is the racial equity impact assessment process. And again, I've done a few of these now, and I haven't ever done one that takes less than a year, but if you can do this in a jiffy, then more power to you. So I don't want to discourage anyone. The next slide, please. So for us, the QAP, I just want to highlight the importance of it. It really allows for us to build an affirmative marketing component for housing across the city, who we serve, how we serve them. The QAP can influence that. It also allows us to scrutinize how developers are managing the wait list, or how people are accessing or not accessing the units. It allows for us to require that developers identify the demographics, the racial components, income, other needs that would be important for us to make sure we review and understand thoroughly in order for us to measure that impact. It also allows us to better understand and design and influence the size of the units. We discovered that some people needed larger units. We discovered that some people needed smaller units, and why those cases needed to be made. We also further understood that. It also allows for us to serve families and serve individuals in a way that really looks at them as a whole. So it's not just providing a unit, low income, you get the ability to stay there, live and thrive, or live and age in place, but also kind of what is it that you need in order to succeed. We looked at and what people told us as well were public access to public transportation, access to Wi-Fi in the buildings themselves, being able to have access to family members who can visit. And during COVID, it was a bit challenging for family members to visit, but some of the individuals had maybe some mental health issues, or maybe we came across a couple of veterans that had some PTSD. And so just kind of learning and really humanizing this experience for us was extremely important, and QAP could help direct how that looks like. We also made sure that we looked at what were the different ways in which we can develop and preserve the units, and also building in barriers, or building in ways in which we can reduce barriers for BIPOC participation. And BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, people of color. And one way that it shows up in the QAP for 2021, which will also be finalized in the next week or so, I believe actually this week, you will see that we have a prioritization and a preference for BIPOC developers. That was not necessarily called out in the past, but in this iteration of the application, we did list that as one of the key elements that we would like to see as part of these proposals. The next slide, please. I wanted to highlight some of the findings that came out of our research. A lot of the low-income housing tax credit units were found to be in high poverty areas. So, in this areas of the South and West Side, and really finding ways and finding that the units were maybe not necessarily in these opportunity areas that we wanted to see, where people can truly, be part of the community and live independently in a way that really is constructive. We also discovered that a quarter of the low-income units financed with LIHTC allocations between 2000 and 2017 were in opportunity areas, while 40% of Chicago census tracts classify as opportunity areas. And then for households with more than 3 members, insufficient units were developed to meet the larger households. And this is particularly something that we looked at in the Latino population. We heard, and we also, it came up in our research that for the Latino community, it was really important to have larger units. It could be that they have multi-generational members in the household. And so, it's important for us to make room for that in these development projects. And we also discovered that Black residents make up approximately 67% of LIHTC tenants, which constitutes about 40% of Chicago's households living in poverty. So that is kind of the racial disparity that we were looking at it, and in our recommendations, we're hoping we made sure that we put in language that can address this. The next slide, please. And so these are the recommendations. There are 8 recommendations. These are all, really spelled out in the QAP. I'm going to read them. I think it's important to just hear them out loud because our QAP applications speak to these recommendations. And again, these recommendations were informed by our engagement, by our team here at the Department of Housing, by the data. And for us, this also speaks to our mission, vision, and values that I presented when we first got started. So the first recommendation that we put forward for our team, again, this is a QAP, an REIA on ourselves, is to ensure Black, Indigenous, people of color, developer service providers benefit from LIHTC. Again, it's going back to allowing for people of color that have been historically marginalized to access the opportunities of being able to develop these projects. The second recommendation is create production targets for specific subpopulation based on needs, improve access to units for marginalized groups, coordinate housing with other neighborhood amenities, improve engagement management standards and enforcement in properties, improve resident outcomes and support homeownership and wealth building opportunities. Wealth building, it's quite a kind of, I think, a unique added kind of benefit that I guess we're putting forward, or that we're asking developers to look at it. It's not necessarily so much, to be able to provide employment for the residents, but be able to give us a pathway to homeownership or a pathway to wealth building for the families that are residing in these units. And it can be maybe financial assistance, supporting with bad credit, things of that nature. Creating more accessible family-friendly homes and making applications more user-friendly. And this kind of speaks to issues that maybe relate to the credit checks or people with arrests and convictions. We've listed those out and really spelled it out in the report. And then ensure LIHTC developments address mental health needs of residents. And I touched on that briefly right before. The next slide, please. And that completes my presentation. On to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Cindy. So to follow up that really amazing work, I am going to briefly touch on another program which is timely, which is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which we just announced this week, is opening applications for tenants and landlords who have been affected by COVID-19 for up to 15 months of rent and utility assistance. Applications are opening Monday, May 24th. That is next Monday at chicago.gov/renthelp. So we're trying to get the word out as much as we can. I'm going to talk a little bit about this program and some of the ways that racial equity and equity play into this, and a little bit on the data and tech side. So the one thing to know about this, which we're calling ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, is this is actually the third round of rental assistance that we have run since the beginning of the pandemic. We actually, I've been saying now for a while, as of March 1st of last year, the city had, or at least DOH, had never run a direct tenant assistance program. And with the launch of ERAP next week, we will be on pace to spend $100 million of direct rental assistance since the beginning of COVID, which is really a remarkable amount of work from everybody in the department and many of our external partners, community organizations, just to make this happen and put together the infrastructure to get that amount of money out to people who need it. We began in April of last year with our first round, which was $2 million for 2,000 grants. We got over 80,000 applications for those grants in just a couple weeks of an open application period, which really hit home to us just how broad and deep the need was right out of the gate as the economy was shutting down at the beginning of the pandemic for this kind of assistance. We then were able to do a second round last summer with CARES Act funds from the federal stimulus, where we had about $20 million that served about 10,000 households. And now we have another $80 million of federal funds from the December stimulus, which we expect to serve about another 10,000 households. In this round, importantly, both landlords and tenants can apply. In previous rounds, they were tenant only. The grants will go to the landlords unless the landlords don't respond, in which case the tenants will receive funds and we can pay for up to 12 months of back rent as well as 3 months going forward, and same for utilities. And that utility piece is also new. Doing this, once this is open, eligible tenants include anybody who lives in Chicago, has suffered some kind of economic hardship due to COVID-19, such as a job loss, reduced hours, or illness within the household. Someone who is at risk of housing instability, which almost definitionally is anybody who has housing arrears or is at risk of having housing arrears that they could be evicted for once the eviction moratorium comes to a close. And anybody who there's an income limit of about, it varies by the number of people in the household, but it's about $75,000 for a family of 4. I've had some people, as I've described the challenge of setting up this program, sort of laugh a little bit and say, how hard could it be to give away money? We're literally just giving people money. But the answer is actually very hard. And the ways in which it is hard are not just a logistical challenge to try to, get the message out and make people who need this help be aware that the program exists, helping get their information in, designing the information or designing the application, and determining what kind of information and documents we're going to require from people, because every piece of documentation you require, on the one hand, helps you target the aid better sometimes, but also poses a barrier to people who, for example, don't have a written lease or work for cash. And these sorts of standard program, income targeted program requirements are in fact themselves major barriers for often the people who most desperately need the help. So, that has been, sort of an evolving piece. We started with very, very simple programs, which had, the advantage of being very simple for the applicant and having very few barriers for them to overcome, very simple documentation requirements. As the amount of funding has increased and as the federal government has become more involved, those requirements have become steeper and more complex, and the program has become much more complex, which requires additional infrastructure, including technology. So in this round, we have contracted with a software vendor called Uncork based in New York. They've done a number of public-facing online service portals, including during COVID for places like New York City and Washington, D.C., as well as a slew of other jurisdictions around the country. And that portal will provide an entrance point for tenants and landlords to apply. It'll also provide a really convenient way for us to have all of the information in one place for processing staff, for reporting, and for just accountability to the federal government, since this is a federal grant, and obviously accountability also to the city council and to residents of Chicago ultimately. Importantly, though, the technology itself also provides, as it makes some things more simple, both for some applicants and certainly for us as administrators, it also itself presents a barrier, because we know that many people don't either have access to technology or don't have a facility with technology and online applications in a way that allows them to, for example, upload a document, right? Which you have to do several times in this application. So as we have relied more on these sorts of technological solutions, we've also had to beef up the sort of support, the in-person support, the call center support for applicants who are not able to access that technology, use that technology on their own. And I think without that additional support, the technology actually becomes a barrier that disproportionately favors people who are not the most vulnerable, not the most in need of this assistance. And so that sort of design and those considerations are really important for making this program actually accessible and available to the people who most need it. So some other equity considerations in ERAP and in rental assistance as we've been doing this. So in addition to the sort of central online portal, something that we have incorporated from the beginning, from the very first round, is the sort of alternative outreach network through what the city calls delegate agencies. These are essentially community-based organizations and other mission-based organizations that we contract with to provide services. So this time we're up to about 20 delegate agencies who we are funding to help identify people who qualify for this assistance, and then to actually help them complete an application and process that application. And we really have selected these delegate agencies, these partners, in order to target specific populations who we believe are underrepresented, or that we know based on data from previous rounds are underrepresented in our applicant pools. So this time we have organizations who are focused on survivors of domestic violence, who often have very particular challenges when it comes to housing, returning residents or residents who have been involved in the criminal justice system, who also have very particular issues when it comes to finding and securing housing. Immigrant populations, I'm really happy to say that this program, as all of our rounds of rental assistance have been, is open to people regardless of documentation status, but finding, or rather making sure that people in those communities are finding our support, are able to access our support, and trust that they can in fact give all the information that they need to provide in order to be approved for these grants, really requires partnering with organizations that have on-the-ground relationships and that have reputations in communities where those people who most need the funds live. And then also regionally focused organizations who can serve particular neighborhoods. We were able to use data from previous rounds to see where in the city applications came from, and see that, for example, we in the second round really underperformed, especially in our central application portal, underperformed on the southwest side, for example. So that is an area where we're trying to double down on finding additional community partners. Language access is obviously really important. So we'll have a call center, as well as the online application will be available in several different languages, as well as the opportunity, if people need to show up in person and provide documents in person and have somebody actually help them upload those documents into their application. And then we also this time issued a request for proposals for sort of a primary case management. So as I said, we're expecting to give out approximately 10,000 grants through this program. That is a lot of document review and calls and just logistical work to do. And so we put out a request for proposals for organizations to do this work. And we're really happy to have awarded it to a local community organization who is hiring Chicagoans to do this work, building capacity of local organizations, and supporting the local economy and underserved populations. Finally, pivoting sharply, although not that sharply, because as I said, ERAP definitely has evolved in the 3 rounds that we've done as a result of data that we've collected in each round. I do want to, I couldn't stop myself, given the audience, from just sort of putting a pin up on the wall about our work on housing data at the Department of Housing. So we, as a department, have been putting out quarterly reports on our program activities since the 1990s, and all of those are posted online. I put a screenshot there. You can Google Chicago Department of Housing 5-year housing plan or housing reports or quarterly reports, and this will come up. And these are really a wealth of information. I mean, it really is a remarkable amount of data about our programs that we publish. On the other hand, it can be sometimes difficult to use this data, compile it, and analyze it, because it is published in the form of a PDF. So one of the things that we've been working on is transforming this data and collecting this data in new ways that are more usable, both publicly and internally. And I think this really speaks to some of the values and the priorities that Cindy talked about. This is really a way of, number one, getting us better public accountability. People can't hold us accountable if they don't know what we've done, or if they can't easily see what we even are doing. Many of our programs, I think it's fair to say, fly under the radar for a lot of people, and publishing more accessible data for this is hopefully part of making people more aware of the many, many, many programs that the department runs that are really, really valuable for Chicago renters, homeowners, and affordable developers. It's also obviously really important for our own internal systems change and strategic planning. As we do more racial equity impact assessments, as we evaluate our own work, we really need to know where we have been and what we have done with our resources in order to know, where we should be going and how we need to adjust. With that, I'm going to wrap up because I think we are well over time and into the into the Q&A time. So I'll put up our contact information and stop talking and let Derek and Sean come back and we'll start the questions.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was great. I'm okay with that you went long because it's a lot of great stuff. Thanks for packing in, especially that last part. You know your audience well, Daniel. So we do have a number of questions from both the audience and Sean and I were actually writing some questions down too as we were listening. One I wanted to start with was actually, Cindy, in your first part of your presentation, you talked about the work of defining the department's mission, vision, and values. I'm kind of curious if you could speak a little bit more about the process. Was there a framework that you followed to do this? Was there something that was instructed by, say, the mayor's office to do this? Like, do other departments do this kind of work as it ties to like the policy that your department's in charge of?
That's a very good question, and I feel like I'm gonna share the blueprint that we followed more transparently than I've ever in the past. Originally, when I started, the commissioner tasked me with completing the mission, vision, values that had started before my time. I've been with the department since April of last year, and between the two of us, we were trying to figure out, how can we really get this mission, vision, values completed remotely and across the entire department. I thought to myself, this is not something that the commissioner and I can lead because we want to have these open conversations with the staff. We want to participate as well, and we want there to be a very inclusive process. And so we joined efforts with RED Resources, who's a consultant here in the city of Chicago, or it's led by Kim Rudd, and she's worked with Elevated Chicago. She's done equity work. She knows city government really well. So it was a perfect partnership. And what we thought would be just a couple of months of us gathering feedback from the staff. We did one large meeting, turned into additional months because we did smaller breakout sessions, and we really wanted each of the bureaus in the Department of Housing to speak to the mission, vision, values, and represent what they do. So it was ultimately about a 4 or 5 month process with RED Resources, where the commissioner and myself were participating just as much as every other member of the staff. And it really involved everyone from, folks that are welcoming you at the door to folks that are financial analysts. We had a chance to hear from everyone, and it was an extremely interactive process. So yeah, that's how we completed it. So it was the commissioner's dream or idea that she had, and I ran with it, and we ended up with a really wonderful 3 statements that now kind of guide all of our work. So it was a pleasure to do it.
Do you know if other departments have done a similar process?
That I know of. I mean, I think a lot of departments have a mission statement, but I haven't quite come across the vision and values. And the values, what we listed aren't really don't elaborate to what they all fully mean, but on our website we have it more spelled out. So I recommend folks visiting that. But from what I've seen, I don't think that I've come across a lot of visions and value statement. I think the Department of Public Health has actually, they might have the 3 statements, but I can't fully answer that with confidence. But I think mission statements probably are most common.
Great, thank you. You want to take the next one, Sean?
Yeah, I'll take an audience question here. Given the unaffordability of housing for the vast majority of target populations, what types of bridge financing are you providing for residents to form limited equity housing cooperatives?
Oh, wow. That's a very, sorry, I don't know if we want to talk about ARO and co-ops, or maybe like the example that we're putting forward hopefully soon.
I can jump a little bit into that. So, you know, one thing that we are, one major project, which we just in a way wrapped up, is revising the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, which is, or ARO, which is the Chicago's inclusionary zoning law that basically says when you build a market rate multifamily development, you have to provide some percentage of those units as affordable. And one of the things that we really looked at and changed a lot, this ordinance just revised ordinance just passed last month, is the treatment of offsite units. So the previous law allowed offsite units, and that just means developers providing those affordable units not in the main market rate building that they're building, but in some other development. The previous law allowed offsite units, but really discouraged it, put a lot of strings on it. And so as a result, less than 5% of the affordable units that we got were offsite. And something that we found that we honestly did not expect during the year-plus long period that we were engaging with every possible person that you could imagine who has an opinion about the ARO, which is a lot of people, is that not only were developers interested in doing more offsite for, you know, could be cheaper, could be whatever, but so were community-based organizations, tenant advocates, you know, tenants themselves, who, for a variety of reasons, you know, some of them would say, well, look, I would rather live in a, you know, rehabbed 3-flat than in a new high-rise downtown. I'd rather live in, you know, the neighborhood where I grew up or close to where my family lives. You know, where maybe rents are rising, or, you know, it has become unaffordable since I was a kid, than in, you know, River North or the West Loop, where a huge portion of ARO buildings get built. And so we, number one, we really expanded the radius of where those offsite units could go. And instead of having them be in a 2-mile circle around wherever the market rate building was, we said, look, the purpose of an inclusionary zoning law is to create affordability in communities where the market and public policy have failed to do that, or are in the process of failing through gentrification. So you can build your offsite units in any of these neighborhoods, right? We use some data-based metrics and we say, okay, these are the high-cost neighborhoods where that are eligible for offsite. And then number two, we're really interested in, again, based on feedback that we got both from developers and from affordability advocates, and this is where I'm actually answering your question, in partnerships for offsite building. So, you know, from the developer's perspective, you know, maybe they specialize in building high rises downtown, and you're saying, hey, can you build us an offsite 3-story building with 8 units? And they're like, I've never done that before. I have no idea how to do that kind of construction. From a tenant's perspective, you know, maybe you don't want a luxury high-rise developer as your landlord if you are a low-income tenant in, you know, whatever neighborhood around the city. And so this is where, you know, where we come into this idea of the market rate developer partnering with either an affordable development company that, you know, an organization that specializes in, is a mission-driven organization that specializes in affordable development, or things like co-ops, limited equity co-ops. And essentially they can partner with a co-op to provide some funds, provide equity to acquire and rehab a building, and then that building becomes an affordable limited equity co-op, and you know, under the ownership of this co-op group. So that is one avenue that we are exploring for on that front.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool. I can
Really
take
quickly to add, it's also
Oh,
an
please.
initiative out of the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice. They've been looking at that as well as a form of community wealth building. So it's very exciting.
Awesome. So next question. So Cindy, when you were showing the sort of those 8 points that came out of the racial impact assessment, could you talk a little bit about maybe how taking those will impact future policy or projects that the Department of Housing will pursue in the future? Are the kinds of projects that the city has, for example, done in the past that you would say not do today in light of that research? Or are there new kinds of project ideas that are now all of a sudden seem new and possible because of that work?
Thank you for going back to that, because I failed to mention, as much as I would like to talk about the smooth data research that we went through, it was actually a pretty rocky road for us. We realized, and one of the recommendations were that we need better data, or at least being able to synthesize that. So it was one of the challenges that we came across as we were reviewing this. But also kind of an unintended positive consequence of this was that the REIA is now influencing a lot of other different initiatives across the board with the Department of Housing. So you'll see some of the recommendations that we listed. You will see the impact or the results of the REIA in the QAP itself that will be published later this month. So it immediately has those changes. And we put changes there of gender nonconforming employees. You'll see a lot what we put in information, requests for information on climate resiliency. How are you approaching that? But a lot of this also, you'll see it across the board with like the ARO in our assessment of fair housing, which is our commitment to affirmatively furthering fair housing. We also listed a number of what we've heard in the REIA in that report, as well as that report influencing parts of the REIA to a degree, because that was also a community-driven process. And in ETOD, because of what we heard from residents, we were able to double down on our commitment to equitable transit-oriented development and the importance of really moving that policy piece forward. We just completed the policy plan that came out of the ordinance that was signed under the Mayor Emanuel administration. And now we're looking at pilot projects and demonstration projects, and a lot of what came out of the REIA also you can find in that report, and then hopefully in those pilot projects, depending on the proposals that we receive. So it's showing up in a lot of different ways. In some ways it will be very evident. In other ways, for instance, the architectural technical standards, we also changed some of the language there. And in our delegate agency request, I didn't talk about that a whole lot, but we currently are accepting new applications to become a delegate agency of the Department of Housing, where you can be part of either the foreclosure prevention program, housing counseling, but we're also requesting that people that focus on climate resiliency and racial equity apply, which is very new to the way in which delegate agencies have been reviewed and recruited for the Department of Housing. So I highly encourage folks, if you are part of an organization and you want to do this work for the Department of Housing, that you submit your application before the deadline, which is coming up in June.
Awesome. I think we have like 30 seconds. Is there a quick one we want to do, Sean?
Yeah, I can take another audience question. Are you including the opportunity for homeowners to build ADUs as an affordable housing alternative? And if so, is there a funding stream for that?
I love this question. Yes, and yes. We, as you may know, the person who asked that may know, we launched our applications for ADUs, which are additional dwelling units, which are essentially basement units or coach houses that you can add to a property that you previously could not under the zoning code, essentially re-legalizing these sort of traditional, traditional housing types, lower cost housing types. So yes, we've gotten well over 100 applications in the first 2-ish weeks of this, which is really exciting. We'll be putting out more details about all of that at the end of the month to sort of celebrate the first month of accepting ADU applications. And starting in June, we will be opening up applications for homeowner grants for low and moderate income homeowners to both do planning grants. So, hiring an architect or contractor to come out, do a, look at your basement, say, okay, here's the work that needs to happen. Let me draw up the plans so you can apply for a building permit, as well as actual construction grants so you can do the work. So look for that next month. And all of that information is at chicago.gov/ADU. So please check that out if you are interested.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on, because I also remember, oh, Cindy, sorry, do you want to add something?
I'm so sorry. My team will kill me if I don't mention that we're currently accepting public comment on the Blueprint for Fair Housing, which is the draft report on the affirmatively furthering fair housing. It is up for public comment. It closes May 28th. So please take a look at that. It also outlines a lot of what we discussed, ETOD, the QAP, the ADUs, and so on.
Awesome. Maybe we can get a link from you after this and share it with folks so they can go straight there to comment.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just mentioning, thinking, Daniel, the first time you came to Shy Hack Night all those years ago, you gave a presentation about zoning and the problems with zoning. And I just like to note the full circle moment we're having here, where you are literally here, like fixing it, or at least some of the things you addressed as problems way back when. So it's really awesome to see that happen.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're all set here. For folks who want to stick around, we'll be doing the post live stream in just a moment here. Actually, Josh, did you want to throw up a slide to remind folks of the link? It's a bit.ly link, CHN-remote Zoom, which you should hear shortly. Oh yes, and also we would love for folks to fill out our demographics survey. We'll drop this somewhat hard to memorize link into the chat, but we also want to know who's attending our events. And so if you could fill out this form, it's anonymous, so we can learn more about who is attending and participating in Shy Hack Night. We'd really appreciate that. And then for folks who want to join the remote Zoom, here it is. It's the bit.ly /CHN remote Zoom. We'll drop that in the live stream chat as well. So I think we're all wrapped here. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you again, Cindy and Daniel, for presenting. It was great stuff. And for everyone else, go forth
and hack.